Chris asked me to also talk about the things that are going on in Alaska and the Arctic as well. So what I want to share with you over the next few slides is things that we're experiencing in Alaska and in the Arctic. Let me tell you first of all that I've served as one of the authors in the upcoming National Climate Assessment. The U.S. National Climate Assessment comes out every 4 years. It will not be released until next year. So what you are seeing is preliminary information. This is just because I'm serving as a chapter author in the Arctic and Alaska and also the tribal chapter. So please know that these aren't firm, but they're all the things that we're looking at right now and doing our final edits on. So these are some of the things that are happening in the world that I live in every day. That Alaska has already warmed an average of 3 degrees, actually in some places up to 6 and 7 degrees. So we're having some real problems that we're seeing when you can see the projections for warming, more and more warming areas. Of course, this brings a lot of consequences, a lot of issues to our communities, human health issues, infrastructure, habitat, food sources, invasive species, tourism, all of these things that are going on in our world because of this warming temperatures. Health issues. You can see some of the problems that we're having. Damage because of water and sanitation lines and issues. Most of our communities in the Arctic are built on permafrost. And unfortunately, most all of our infrastructure on permafrost as well. So when those systems fail, many of our communities are now going back to things like honey buckets. Probably you know what that is here in this world, where you have to haul your own waste in buckets to the lagoon because our sewer systems and water systems aren't functioning very well anymore. You can see in the bottom slide here one of the communities that we've been working with called Newtok. And this is unfortunately a pretty common occurrence now that's happening in a lot of our communities. Flooding of a lot of the places because of coastal erosion, because of river systems, ice conditions, all of these things that I'll talk about a little bit more. We're also seeing a lot of change in concern about foodborne illnesses that will be coming as part of the health issues. Interestingly, we're seeing some real changes in the insects. We've seen many more things like wasps. I don't know if that's happening here in your area, but we've had like huge wasp infestations in our communities now. A lot more mosquitoes than we've had in the past. So some of these things are really already beginning to impact our communities pretty well. Erosion, declining sea ice has increased erosion in the storms on our communities. This on the left here, this is my hometown. This is Nome, and that house that's being flooded there is my brother's house. So you know these things become pretty personal when you realize that it's not just someplace far away, but this is really happening to your own communities, your own folks. So. They used to call these storms, remember, they were called 200-year storms. Then they started calling them 100-year storms, and then 50-year storms. I've seen so many of these in my lifetime now, it's hard to count them anymore. It happens almost every year. In Nome now, they've built up a rock seawall that's helping to protect at least some of the front street, but not all of it. So you can see the damage at the end of where those rocks don't keep the ice, or don't keep the water from rushing in. And over on the right-hand side, another community, Shishmaref, that's, of course, going through the same kinds of issues with serious problems with erosion, with coastal storms, and loss of a lot of their building and structures. I'll talk a bit more about also the need for relocation. That is another thing that many of our communities are now looking at and having to go through now. Permafrost issues, that permafrost has warmed over the last 30 years. You know, in our communities, the truth is, our folks have been talking about these issues since at least like the 1960s or before. Our folks recognized that there really were major things that were happening, changes in like the permafrost melt, When our ice cellars, up north in particular, you know, where we buried our food, where we keep our food in the ice cellars, those started sweating and melting 30 years ago. So quite a long period of time ago, and people were saying there's things that are happening that are changing the conditions around us. And it's taken science, Western science, a bit of too much time to catch up to that knowledge base that comes from our communities. Where I grew up again in Nome, you know, we never used to have any beaver, and now the place is overrun with beaver. Luckily, we've learned how to make really cool beaver hats. But that being aside, why is that? Because there was never a source of food for those beaver. Now the tree line has moved so much further north that we have beaver not only in Nome, but actually people are saying that they're beginning to see them in Barrow, and that's about as far up north as you can get. So things really are changing there. That, of course, the permafrost has real impacts on our water and sanitation. You can see some of the sloughing that's happened this is in the interior part of the state. And it impacts lots of things, our road systems, airports, all of those kinds of things that are really facing some critical damage now because of these permafrost issues. One of the real scary things is methane, and one of the things that people haven't really started to look at yet, at least not enough. The Arctic has been a sink for all of these contaminants, all of these things that have been traveling into our environment for years and years and years. And now because of the warming, we're becoming a source of all of those pollutants now that are going back out into our universe, into our world around us. So these issues of us now becoming a source of contaminants and releases like methane and other things is something we need to pay more attention to. If you've seen some of the latest science that's come from Russia, maybe you saw the one scientist lighting a match over one of the releases or the gases releases in the ground, and it just blew up. There's so much methane there and in the caves that they're looking at in Russia that it's going to be a real contributing factor to our environmental issues in the years to come. Ocean acidification, we're seeing some of these signs already where our crab are beginning to, their shells are becoming softer. So we know that some things are already happening in our world around us, around ocean acidification, and is going to be happening more and more as time progresses. Our fisheries are of course being impacted. I think everybody has heard that we've had some pretty bad years, some good years, but this year, for instance, there were so few king salmon in Alaska that it was closed, except for a couple of days to subsistence fisheries. But like I got no king salmon this year, which is one of the things that many of our communities really rely upon. So we were not able to have access to them. Wildfires, another major problem. We're seeing more and more of these fires in our communities, especially in the interior areas. This one where you see the fire burning right here, you know what that is, the one in front of it? That's a Trans-Alaska gas pipeline. So we have some concerns about what can be happening within our communities. We're seeing many more lightning strikes than we have ever seen before in our communities. So the lightning strikes, again, being impacted by the trees that have been decimated by spruce bark beetle and other kills that have left our areas really devastated. Lightning strike come, and that's the result. In my area up north where we have a lot of tundra fires have become a really huge issue as well, again, because of the lightning strikes. Tundra fires burn really differently from these forest fires. They can burn underground for months or even years of time, and you don't even know that's happening. So these are real concerns of us and what could potentially to happen to many of our communities. And of course, you can see the human health effect that this has on all of our communities as well. Glaciers, Alaska glaciers. People talk a lot about the Greenland ice sheet, and that's a huge issue, but people don't recognize that the amount of water that will be coming from Alaska is almost equal to the same thing as Greenland. So we're talking really a double whammy. I mean, this is really issues that are happening here in Alaska. We know that we're losing more and more of our glaciers. There are only a couple of advancing glaciers in Alaska. All of the rest of them we're losing as retreating glaciers. Implications for global sea level rise. Everybody knows that's something that many of our communities, especially the SIDS communities, are really having issues now. Implications for salinity, sedimentation, what that does, ocean currents, all of these are things that we know we have to pay more attention to, and it's not just the Arctic. If you look at what's happening in the Andes and other places where they have these glaciers as well, this is really a worldwide event and something that the world needs to be more concerned with. Sea ice, I've talked a lot about already, the sea ice declining more and more rapidly. Models of projections of loss between 2030, 2050. You know, every year, unfortunately, that estimate keeps coming down. I'm hoping that it's going to be 2030. Just doesn't, you know, it seems like we're proceeding much faster than before. All of these, of course, having serious impacts on not only our environment, where our communities are going out trying to hunt successfully, having much more difficulty getting out there safely. We've had serious consequences where some of our whalers way up north have had to be helicoptered back because they got trapped going out by fast-moving ice, so had to bring them back in by helicopter. Where we used to be able to go hunt get our whale maybe 2 or 3 miles offshore, now they're going 20, 30, 40 miles out, and if you've ever tried to drag, you know, a couple tons of whale meat back to the community in a skin boat, then you know that there's a big difference between 2 miles and 20 miles. So it's making things really much more difficult for our communities. We also recognize that the opening of the Arctic is going to have some opportunities for us in the Arctic. We're trying to look at ways that we can plan for some of that development. We know it's going to happen sort of with or without our desires, but to acknowledge that it's there. We know that there will be more tourism. Just a couple of years ago, actually, in Barrow, folks woke up there one morning with 400 German tourists on their shores, and nobody knew how they got there. Coast Guard didn't know where they came from, but there they were. Luckily, being the very aggressive and smart people, we sold them a lot of stuff. So there's one way of beginning to deal with some of the issues. We recognize that there are a lot of research opportunities that will come, marine transport, longer seasons, mining, offshore oil and gas, longer growing seasons, and opportunities for our communities in education and employment. We know that these are some of the opportunities that will be there. We also recognize that we have challenges that we will have to face as part of those, the opening of those waters as well. Again, looking at the number of ships that are going to be coming back and forth in those areas and are already starting. The tourism industries that will be building up there, the fishing industry, the pollution, the search and rescue operations. Everybody is now making a run to the Arctic. Who owns the Arctic? You know, Russia is planting its flag there on the bottom of the seabed. You know, everybody really wants to be part of what's going on in the Arctic. If you recognize, or if you've heard, you know, the Arctic Council that I was talking about earlier, now they have places like China, India, Japan that have all now become observers to the Arctic Council because they see what's going on. They want to be part of the action. They want a little piece of what's going on there. So these non-Arctic nations really understand and want to be seated at that table, influencing what's happening in the Arctic as well. And I think this is my last slide here. I want to especially invite you, for those of you who have children or work with educators, this is a project that the Science Commission, probably I think one of the premier things we've done. We worked for more than 5 years with WGBH, with Boston Public Television, the people who produced Sesame Street, because we were trying to find a way to really bring education and information from our native perspectives to teach our kids. we recognize that this has to happen. We've got to be able to transfer the kind of knowledge and information from us, the elders and elders-to-be, to our kids in the future. So we have developed this entire program now for K through 12, complete lesson plans, hundreds of videos, stories from all over, including many, many from Canadian Arctic, from elders all over Canada. So it's not just about Alaska. We've really included a lot of our Inuit brothers and sisters as well. We really are trying to get people to get their kids involved in this. We've actually had a lot of the universities begin to pick up and use this because stuff in here is quite high level. We've made information that's relevant to people all over in many areas, and we've done it in a really interesting way. You see the way we look at it, traditional ways of knowing through spirit, air, fire, water, and earth. We looked at it as earth as a system. So we've sort of designed this in a really unique fashion, and I really invite you to take a look at this. Spend a little bit of time. You're going to really enjoy this, and hopefully your kids will as well. So that's where I will end, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I think we have some time. If anybody has any questions for Patricia.
What do you call it, PP, in the Arctic Council, how they feel both about the increased observers and then their own role and what they're able to accomplish right now?
I think pretty much the PPs have gone on record as being somewhat concerned about the dilution of at the table of just inviting more and more people coming in. And also, to be quite honest with you, I know as former chair of ICC, when you're looking at those places that have some of the worst records for human rights, being members, it's pretty hard to acknowledge that. That being said, it's also, the Arctic Council is one of the few places on this planet where we have a chance to really sit down with not only the senior Arctic observers or senior Arctic officials, but also with the ministers that meet every 2 years as part of the Arctic Council. And for us in the US, Senator Clinton and Kerry, who came for the very first time to the Arctic Council meetings. So where else do you really get a chance to sit down with Hillary Clinton or with John Kerry? So it does provide a unique opportunity. And we're pretty actively engaged in all of the product that comes out of the Arctic Council. Our funding is still terrible. That's a major issue and one that we've really been trying to work on. We've gotten a few pots of money that have come from the U.S. State Department and a couple of foundations, but still not enough to really beef up so that we can work alongside our partners at the Arctic Council.
The Alaska Native Science Commission has been enormously successful in bringing together traditional knowledge holders and academic researchers. How did you do that?
Retraining. No, I hate to say it that way. The truth of the matter is, it's most researchers, I think it's hard for most researchers to be able to go out into a community and to really be able to explain things well enough for people to understand. So we honestly have spent a lot of time in sort of working with researchers to get them so that they can explain methodologies, they can explain results, and we encourage them, invite them as part of our teams to come out as we're working with the community, so they can see the way that we work within our communities, the kind of the way that we start our meetings, the respect that's paid to people around us, the traditional circles that we use, and not the usual half a day you're there for 3 hours and you're out on the next plane, but really getting people to spend the time that it takes to start to build that trust relationship. So now people do trust us. Like I said, we've been around for a long time, and we work with the researchers to make sure that they can do that as well. This is what I call the granny sniff test. I say, would your grandmother understand what the heck you just said? You know, if your grandma isn't going to understand that, then nobody else is going to get it either. So you really need to be able to speak so that people can understand what you're talking about. It just doesn't help to talk in graphs and charts and, yeah.